Hello and welcome to the Dumb It Down podcast. I'm your host, Eric Larson, and I'm joined here by Julie Verni today. Although Julie's last name is Verni and it's different than mine, she's actually my cousin. So she got a sneak peek into this podcast and the brainstorming process, helped me with my cover art, and is here in the flesh. Good evening, Julie.
Hello, Eric. How are you?
How are you today?
I'm good. I'm ready to go.
Julie is in New York City. I actually visited her / went on a work trip a couple weeks ago. Julie had to deal with some of my engineering sales people at a conference and learn about some new products and basically get sold to herself. So that was a fun experience. No?
Yeah, day in the life.
I feel like, they don't let you out of the studio and the office very often, but every now and then take advantage of the city.
Yeah, there you go. Exactly. Especially when my cousin's in town, gotta go hang.
Yes. We have 18 cousins total, and they're kind of spread across the East Coast. One just went West Coast too. Grew up in New Jersey, going to the Jersey Shore, and they are my biggest supporters. I've got a lot of big supporters, but they're pretty close, the Verni Hype Squad. So shout out to them and my aunts and uncles who will certainly be listening to this. To get Julie's 2 cents on a topic and industry that's a little adjacent to engineering, but not directly engineering. So Julie is an architect, and we're going to talk a little bit about how she came to that, and school and work, and what really matters in both. I'll let you take it away a little bit, Julie. We grew up together, visiting on Thanksgiving and Christmas and recording this around the holidays, but we didn't talk much about school or work because that's not really what cousins talk about at that age. But talk a little bit about how you came into wanting to be an architect and when you found that out.
So when I was a kid, like a little kid, I was always interested in art, as I'm sure you remember.
That's true.
And I was always drawing and taking art classes, and that was sort of a main focus of mine when I was a kid, and I was okay at it. And there was definitely a time where I was like, I'm going to be an artist one day. This is young, like 5-6 years old. But then by the time I was about probably 10, I was already talking about wanting to be an architect. And of course that makes most adults roll their eyes because what 10-year-old is like, I'm going to be an architect.
Actually knows.
Yeah. So, but I sort of had the aptitude with like science and math, and as the years went on, it sort of seemed like my abilities in school versus my sort of artistic and creative abilities would maybe lend well to architecture in general. After speaking, I spoke with other architects who were already in the practice, and like I said, I did these pre-college programs.
Yeah, did your parents kind of throw that on the table as an option, or how did you even get connected with architects that young?
So my mom is a big believer in connecting and networking. So from very young, 12, 13, I was already talking to people in the field. When I was in high school, I actually, my art teacher from when I was a kid, her nephew was a very recent architecture graduate and was working at an architecture firm in our hometown. And he gave me architecture lessons when I was a freshman in high school.
Wow.
Which, that was pretty wild. It was super, super nice of him. I mean, of course, my parents were paying him, but that really helped because he would give me sort of exercises that he would have his freshman year of college. So it was kind of showing what could be done and what your brain needed to do, because it wasn't here, design a floor plan. It was much more abstract than that. And that is kind of how it went once school came around. Yeah.
That's awesome. I feel like, that's an experience that a lot of people don't have. And I asked a little bit later about if you have a mentor, and I feel like it's really hard to find someone who is doing what you want to do at any age. So, maybe he's not much of a mentor, but at that stage of your life, that's super helpful and important. And I kind of touched on in my first episode, but my parents made me do an engineering internship where I saw what 10 different engineers did. And, what I took away from it wasn't that I wanted to fell in love with any one job. But I was like, oh, this is still, there's a ton of stuff I can do with this that, I'll find something eventually. So very cool. Okay. So you've identified architecture with the help of parents and, go get them attitude.
Always.
You decided architecture in school. You applied to a couple schools. I mean, Julie is as Jersey as it gets. So I looked in the Jersey and New York City area. You'll probably resent that.
Funnily enough, there's only one accredited architecture school in the entire state of New Jersey. So just FYI.
Okay. Well, I put New York and New Jersey in the same category, but that's just because I'm from the South, right?
Oh, yeah.
Oh, boy.
By my senior year, I definitely knew I wanted to go into architecture. I didn't apply to school for anything else. I applied to a bunch of different schools, but I didn't apply to any other majors. I had done some pre-college programs leading up to my senior year of high school. So I did one at the Parsons School of Design here in New York. I did one at Drexel, which is in Philadelphia. And I did one at NJIT, New Jersey Institute of Technology. And those were really helpful and interesting because, one, it sort of showed the rigor of what the programs were going to be like when I finally got into college. But they were also very different in the way that they were teaching architecture and design. So Parsons is a strictly art school. I went there for a fine arts program. Drexel is sort of in between. It's, design and architecture sort of combined. And then NJIT, while it's an architecture school, it's very technical. And so that sort of helped me when I was a senior decide what kind of architecture school I wanted to go to, because there is sort of a variation in how the curriculum is set up and what they emphasize in their schools. So that was a big indicator when I was applying.
Yeah, I guess, right. Just like any other major or concentration, you can break it down a couple different ways and have to figure some of that out before school and some during school. All right, so take me to freshman year. I know architecture is like a 5-year program. You knew you were baked in that. You probably weren't doing the studio much yet, but you were, probably comfortable with your decision, selecting some classes, getting out of the gen ed. Is that all accurate, or what was your mind state?
So it's actually not very accurate.
Perfect.
So architecture is one of those degrees that if you are going to go for undergrad, you need to basically commit immediately. So there's sort of two paths to becoming an architect. You can either do what I did and get the 5-year Bachelor of Architecture, which is considered to be a professional degree, or you can go to your 4-year undergrad, do whatever you want, really, and then get your master's in architecture later. And you end up at the same end point, which is that you could go and get an architecture license and be considered an architect. So because of that, because I did the 5-year undergrad, which is it's an accredited program nationally, they hit the ground running immediately. I was in studios the first semester, full-blown design, everything, 18 credits. We were ready to go on day one. And that's just because they cram so much into the 5 years. Like there's so much that has to be learned that they really have to start on day one or you'll never finish it all.
Interesting. So with that, when you went into school, you were like, I want to do the 5-year path instead of that other path. Why was that?
I wanted to do that path because I knew that's what I wanted to do. And it's faster. It was faster. It was cheaper because what it comes down to is 5 years versus 7. So if you did an undergrad, it's 4 years. If you want to get your master's, it's another 3 for a master's of architecture. For the BArch, the Bachelor of Architecture, it's the same outcome essentially, but a lot less time. The only difference is you have to know.
Would there be a typical undergrad that people would do, or is it like a what's it when you're going to be a doctor, pre-med, where you kind of do a couple of, or can choose from a couple? What would someone do?
It really depends on the person. I know a lot of people who have a master's of architecture at my current office. That's pretty common. A lot of people have gotten their master's degree a little bit later. They usually have some sort of arts or engineering background. So sometimes people do start off in engineering and then later on go into architecture, and those people are like the mega, like they know everything people. I have another friend who went to her undergrad in art history, And then there's people who are completely in a totally different field altogether. Like I know someone who was pre-med and then later switched to architecture or decided to get her master's in architecture instead of going to medical school.
Okay.
So you can really do anything for an undergrad. That being said, there is an undergraduate degree that's 4 years that is a Bachelor of Science in Architecture. And every now and then a master's program will take credits from that undergraduate degree, but I feel like people sometimes they don't realize when they're going into school, into that program, that that's not the degree that you need. Like you will have to go and get another one
that's brutal.
in order to be licensed. So it's that's definitely the difference. The 4 and the 5 is a big difference professionally. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a lot to decide on when you're 17 or 18 years old. Like I know I didn't want to be locked into a master's. So I guess you probably had the same mindset there where but your only options were 5 years or more. So interesting. But all right. So moving on a little bit, I remember the architects I knew at school were in studio all the time, and stayed that 5th year because I did too, and did a lot of work. What was your impressions of the degree by the time you were a senior? Were you kind of burnt out? Were you excited? Just general thoughts.
So by the time I was in my 5th year, I feel like I had gotten the hang of it. I was definitely ready to be done, and I had set myself up pretty well. I really pushed myself the first 3 or 4 years. So I was part-time my last year, which was great because I was working like 25 hours a week in an architecture office in the city.
Nice.
So by the time I was done, I was done. I was definitely ready to be done because the program, it's as you said, like the architecture students are in studio all the time. That is 100% accurate. And it definitely took me a minute to sort of get my footing. I worked round the clock. I didn't pull many all-nighters. There were plenty of people that did, but it's sort of the broken record of architecture school to be like, time management, time management, time management. And it's true, if you managed your time properly, you could sort of figure it out. Like I worked during college. I was an on-campus tour guide for a few years, and then I was working in offices too at a certain point in time too. So, it can be done, but at first it definitely is a big sort of culture shock of going from high school, especially where I went to high school, super, super small school, 300 students total, very sort of, we're going to teach you, but, it's up to you to figure it out. Whereas now it's like, you better get it together right now or you're going to have some problems. So it definitely was a big adjustment, but I definitely feel like I got a very well-rounded education where I went to school. And I left feeling proud of it. And I look back on it fondly. I wouldn't want to do it again, but I am happy that I did.
You mean well-rounded as in, what the skills you took away from it, not necessarily all of the classes and stuff? Or what do you mean by well-rounded?
A little bit of both. I think, Pratt, so I went to Pratt Institute for anyone who's wondering where I went to school.
What was your mascot?
The Cannoneer, the Pratt Cannoneer.
Go Cannoneers. Yeah, they're not in March Madness. Otherwise, I'd probably know it.
Yeah, no, the school was founded in the late 1800s. So it's like Pratt history, whatever. But it is an art and design school. That's what it's known best for. And so I think that people maybe underestimate the sort of technical skills that a design school is able to impart on its students. I didn't really feel that way, and having gone into the field, I don't fully feel that way. I think there are probably areas that could be improved on, but I felt that I left school having a very good design education and enough of the foundation of skills to be able to work professionally in the office.
I see. Yeah. So is that helped by your classes or your experience or kind of all the above? I mean, I know work experience wasn't required for engineers, but was helpful. But it's not like you had a professional development class or certification or anything, right?
We didn't have a certification, but we actually did have a class called professional practice. So that was a whole semester. We had technical classes like construction documents and building systems and things like that. So we did have to learn all of that. It's a little bit harder to learn when you're not doing it every day. Like I've definitely learned more of that holistically now being in the field all the time.
Sure.
But yeah, it wasn't required for us either to have internships, but it was highly, highly, highly encouraged. And I started working in offices right after my freshman year of college. So as we spoke about before, my mom was really big on make sure you get to know architects and meet people. And I was really lucky when one of the architects I spoke to before I went to college, she has the practice in my hometown in New Jersey, and I spoke to her when I was in high school, and then when when I finished my first year of college, she offered me an internship, paid internship. I still to this day, she is the reason I was able to start off on such a good foot. She trusted me with so much and taught me so much, and really like trusted me with. Like she just kind of had blind faith, I guess, because I didn't know anything yet. She hired me, I knew nothing.
Yeah. Wait, so what year was that for you? Right after school?
It was right after my first year of college, so 2014.
Oh boy, okay. So yeah, that's super helpful.
Yes. Yeah, so I worked for her for a few years when I was in my early years of college. So
like back in the summers, or she'd send you stuff?
Yeah, I'd work for her in the summers and sometimes over like Christmas break, like that.
Nice.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, you've got me thinking here, because I feel like I came out, like none of my classes or few of my classes prepared me for like my job, but I also went into sales, and I feel like there's a different like certification for architecture that like gives you this almost floor when you come out of school. You have to have these skills. Everyone knows you have these skills, and they're like usable real world skills. So my question is, do you come out and like know that you want to do commercial buildings or residential buildings or a certain type of concentration of what you're doing, or is it kind of homogenous as far as, you know, building's a building, they have certain systems and a certain look? How did you decide and process that?
So I would say, and this is just speaking from my own experience, I would say that where you go to school has a lot to do with what kind of architecture you end up doing. So I went to school in New York. I was taught the New York City building code in school.
Gotcha.
Not super in depth because that's just not what you do in school, but that definitely drove it. And so the projects that we were doing, like our sites were in New York. And so we would they were obviously hypothetical buildings, but we were doing big commercial structures, not homes or, you know, barns or anything on the smaller scale.
Amazon warehouses.
Not so much. So I think it does kind of depend where you go to school. I think if you go to school outside of a big city, they'll sort of teach you more specifically to the area that you are living in. But again, I'm just speaking to my own experience. So when I graduated from Pratt, the experience that I had was like mostly large scale design. And they gave us sort of a mix of residential and commercial. I always kind of swung towards the residential, but I would say that my internships greatly affected me in that. And I would not have been able to figure out exactly what kind of work I wanted to do had I not had them. So my first internship, I worked at a small firm in New Jersey doing homes. And I enjoyed that work, but it always seemed like I wanted to do something bigger. So the second firm I worked at, which I worked at in my last year of college and then right out of college, like my first real job, I was working for a developer and we were doing mid-size multifamily residential, so like 8 to 10 unit condo buildings. And the firm I work at now, we do like extra large high-rise residential. So right now I'm working on like a 50-story tower in the city. So you kind of have to dabble, I think, a little bit and see where your sweet spot is. And working will definitely help you get there. Yeah.
Well, again, you've got me thinking, because my friends, I couldn't tell you which of my friends has like a mechanical engineering 1 title. And I feel like lots of classes and coursework in your degree kind of pushes you into this, you know, you're going to be an engineer, you're going to do this, but then maybe it's the people I surround myself with, but go into project management or sales or like some other facet of business that needs some technical expertise, but doesn't necessarily, you know, become a engineer who gets their PE, professional engineering license, and like stamps drawings and that kind of thing. So to ask you, do you know architects who kind of went in these other directions? Is that kind of the norm, or is it pretty focused toward this job and that's just what people do because it's in high demand? How does that work?
So I'm always pretty surprised by this, but I know many people who don't go into architecture. I would say that, like, honestly, the majority, at least at Pratt, don't.
Okay.
They go into something else. It's not usually it's not usually sales or anything like that, but it's usually another design facet. No. It's just usually something design related, but isn't architecture. I'm always myself completely shocked by this because it was 5 years of hell in a way, but at the end of the day, an architecture degree is a pretty high level design degree to have. So if you can design a building, like you can design something else. So I actually know a lot of friends who have gone into like furniture design or graphic design or like some kind of industrial design facet. Sometimes people move into photography or they go into historical preservation. So architecture, like engineering, I think, even though it's a pretty specific degree in theory, it's one that's a very well-rounded education if you wanted to try something sort of adjacent to it. Whether it be a design degree, or I know people also who have graduated from architecture school and then decided to be engineers too, and like go and get their master's in some sort of engineering and move along to that. Or construction management is a big one too. Architects will decide they want to go make more money and become construction managers, which I have a minor in, by the way.
Congratulations.
Thank you so
should
much.
Do that too. Go get that bread.
Yeah, you watch me. We got time.
Yeah, this is true. No, this is eye-opening because I knew there would probably be parallels from talking to you. And for anyone who thinks I'm cheating my podcast because episode 3, I'm not doing an engineer. Listen to all these parallels. So yeah, I've got to make sure that I get some more engineers on that have a more traditional background, because it seems like you went architecture traditional for now, and a lot of the people that I know went engineering degree, and what they say about an engineering degree is like it teaches you about problem solving. Like even if you never do a fluids problem or a solids problem or calculus again, you've got this background. Would you say the same about architecture?
Oh yeah, 100%. I mean, that's pretty much the job, is solving problems that you created for yourself all day long. But no, I think it's helpful that we're doing this, because the question I get the most from kids, like, so my high school contacts me all the time with kids that are like, oh, I might want to be an architect. And the most common question I get from people is, should I go into engineering or should I go into architecture? So I think this is probably going to be a pretty helpful podcast if someone is really trying to figure out what path to go on, because a lot of times people who are considering engineering are also considering architecture, I think.
So what's your answer to that question in a boiled down fashion?
I think it just depends what you're interested in. It's really different. Like, I work with engineers every day, whether it be mechanical, electrical, structural, civil engineers. I work with all of them every single day. Mm-hmm. The building physically can't go up without them. That being said, a lot of times I see what they're doing and I'm like, I'm so happy that's not my job. So I think it really just depends on your level of interest. If you're really math heavy and you really like to sort of sit and figure out problems in that way, I'd say engineering is probably more your alley. Whereas architecture, like, yes, there's the problem solving, and yes, there is math. It's not like I don't do math every day, but it's much more of a, you have to have many tracks going at the same time in terms of solving something mathematically and also solving it aesthetically. So you have to sort of marry the two. And the architect, a lot of times, I know you and I touched on this earlier, is that the architect often employs the engineer, at least in a building situation, not in, there's so many things that engineers do, as we're getting into. This is the whole point of your podcast, right? But architects usually are sort of the top of the food chain in a building, and the architects hire out for engineers, and the engineers are basically subcontracted to the architect.
Right. They're, for a new building, they're reporting to the architect in a sense.
Most of the time. Not always. Sometimes it's structured differently depending on the size of the project, but most of the time the architect is the one employing the engineers.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So what would a smart building be? No, I'm just kidding. That's a question for me to answer. Cool. Interesting. So looking forward, is there another certification you need? Is there a master's in your future? Are you happy with your current kind of, being an architect, or what's the future look like for Julie Verni?
So full disclosure, so that so NCARB doesn't come after me, I am not an architect, technically. I don't have my RA yet. I'm in the middle of that. So that's one of the things you have to do once you graduate from 5 years of school. Then you get to go on and log thousands of hours with a firm. And then once you're done with that, then you can start sitting for your architecture exams. And that's
so what are you right now?
I'm technically just a designer. I'm an architectural designer at the moment. Or sometimes people are draftspeople. Oftentimes you'll see people like referred to as like an intermediate architect, but legally you're technically not supposed to do that because you're not an architect yet.
Interesting.
So it is it's a little bit of a tricky subject, because saying to somebody, oh, I'm in architecture, they don't really know what that means exactly. So I am not technically an architect yet, but I'm well on my way. I've been taking my tests. I'm hoping to have it done by next year. But that's sort of the last step of the architecture journey, is to actually get that registered architect at the end of your name.
Gotcha. Registered. So yeah, okay. So I mean, it's similar to engineering.
Yes.
So at the end of your senior year, ideally, you could take it whenever, but I actually took it then because I figured I'd forget anything, which happened. I got my fundamentals of engineering, FE. It's not initials, but I passed a test so that in 5 years of logging a certain amount of hours, you could become a professional engineer, or PE, and then you get the initials after your name. I don't know if it's more common in engineering or architecture, but I guess, like we've covered here, if you're going to be a traditional architect or engineer, you need that certification to stamp drawings, I guess, on the engineer's side. Architect would be the same.
Yep.
Okay.
Yeah, that's really the big pull, right? But even if you, like, let's say my office, perfect example. It's a medium-sized office for 100 people or so. There, I would never stamp a drawing there unless I was a partner. There's partners that stamp the drawings. However,
the big wigs.
Yes. And they're the ones that the liability insurance is filed under, and it's all some corporate nonsense, right? But
sure.
For me to have that RA at the end of my name would be a significant pay increase. So it's a professional, even if you never want to open your own firm ever, it's something that you professionally should get, because at a certain point your salary will just plateau. It's just the way it works.
Yeah. That's common across a lot of jobs. I mean, I'm thinking of teachers and nurses and others too.
Yeah, exactly.
But yeah, I would like to, maybe I'll have a teacher and a nurse on. I bet there's parallels there too. Actually, I was talking to someone about that. Anyway, awesome. Well, that's all pretty interesting. I didn't know a lot of that about Julie. And unless there's anything else, I've got a couple questions I had sent you that I wanted to ask specifically. Anything else on architecture you'd like to chime in?
The only thing I would say is, like, don't do it if you don't love it. That's really my biggest piece of advice. I love it, and I loved school, and even though it was really, really hard, and the job itself is really hard, it's obviously a super rewarding job. When you walk past a building that you built, there is nothing more satisfying than that.
That is cool.
Yeah, it's
so
pretty awesome.
What if you're a freshman and you're not sure if you love it or not? How can you know that early?
I hate these questions because I don't want to tell somebody how to conduct their future. But I think if you are a freshman and you're getting through your first year, and there are just as many days that you're not enjoying as days you are enjoying, I would maybe reconsider. That's my honest advice. And I'm not going to speak for anyone, because I had a professor my freshman year of college who was so discouraging after the first year. And I just don't believe in that. Like, I think, follow your dreams. And if you think you want to do it, totally keep going. But if you find yourself unhappy a lot of the time, I don't put yourself through it. It's so much to not enjoy it.
Yeah. Okay. Wise words from Julie.
Wise words or somebody's dreams crushed.
Yeah. Well, I know a lot of people who, switched from maybe one concentration of engineering to another, either because they didn't like it or their grades weren't great. I don't know. And right. I mean, there's something to be said for pushing through, and, you could always get a different job than maybe your,
yes, of course.
Your course.
As many people I know did, as I said. A lot of people I know, by fourth year, they were like, I don't know about this. And they completed the degree, as I think you should. If you get that far, you absolutely should. It's really like at the very, very beginning. If you have if you're not sure and you have an opportunity to change, you maybe could or should. If you get halfway through school, you should finish. You've already put in the time. You might as well just finish it up.
Yeah. Yeah, I tend to agree. And parents everywhere would probably agree with that too.
I think so.
All right. Well, that leads us to our, I was going to say rapid fire round, but we can take our time. So first question is, what's been your biggest screw up?
So thankfully I haven't had anything like an epic screw up.
Good.
But I will say, I think that I kind of screwed up on my first job, negotiating my salary. It was a little bit of a tricky situation because I was already working at that office for a while. I had already
This is the lady?
No.
From Jersey? Okay.
No. This is my first job, like my first city job, where I was working at a firm in New York my senior year of college. And then upon me working there through the school year, he offered me a full-time position, which was amazing, of course. There's no greater thing when you're in your last semester of college than to have a job set up for you when you are done. It takes a huge weight off, especially when you're like, with architecture, we had a big thesis project we had to complete. I'm sure you had something similar. So to not have to worry about like applying to jobs and stuff was really amazing. But what was complicated about it was he offered me the job in March. And so obviously school's over in about May or so. And so it was kind of a tough position because other offices were not going to start interviewing for a May or June position in March. So it was kind of a, you have to take it now or never situation. And so speaking of mentors, I actually did work for one other firm briefly. It was not an architecture firm. It was actually a landscape architecture firm, but I loved working there. And the woman who runs that office is, in my opinion, an icon. And I look up to her quite a bit. And so I actually called her up when I got the job offer because it was a lot lower than what I had wanted or expected. And so I called her up and was like, hey, listen, I laid it all out for her. I was like, in your professional opinion, is this something that I should consider, or should I, it's like how you take it or leave it, like you take the shot of leaving it on the table and, you take the shot of, will you get it hired somewhere else? And that kind of stress. And she gave me some pointers on how to negotiate it higher, but said that even if it doesn't come up that much, she would recommend that I take it. Not just because of what I was saying about the job, that, being scared if you don't get another job or something, but there were other reasons to stay at that office, which is why it was so tempting in the first place. They were giving me a lot of responsibility. It was a smaller office. I really liked the people I worked with, and I was learning a lot, and there were plenty of good reasons to stay. And so anyway, I negotiated my salary a little bit higher, but I was definitely intimidated by the entire situation, by the fact that there was like so much on the line, and that I was young, and that I was a woman, speaking to a man boss and trying to like make my own way. And I don't know that there's anything, looking back, I don't know there's anything I could have done in the moment, because it was it's the first time you do it. The first time you do a salary negotiation, you kind of just got to learn what to do and to believe in yourself and just be tough. But yeah, I definitely wish I had started a little higher at that office. I worked for very little for a little while there.
So you were saying other architects hire about 2 weeks out or closer to a start date because architects out of school aren't necessarily in high demand. Is that true?
That's part of it. And it's also subject to demand of work in the office. So sometimes like in my current office, when they hired me, they needed me basically immediately because they had just gotten a brand new project and they wanted somebody new to be on it. And so they hired me specifically to take on that job. So it kind of depends on like what the office's workload is part of the reason. But yeah, it's the kind of thing where if someone's going to hire someone who graduated right out of college and they have interns like me at that office, like they were going to hire me before they would hire a classmate of mine. Just
Sure.
because I worked for them for a year, they already put in the time and effort on me, So that's why. Right. So that's partially why, but it definitely made it tricky it's not like I could just lay all my offers out on the table. And what was worse is my boss at the time, he gave me like 2 weeks to decide. So it wasn't like, hey, thank you so much for offering this to me. Can I let you know in May? Like that wasn't going to be acceptable either. So it was really like, you have to decide today or soon, in the next 2 weeks, or my offer's off the table basically. So it was kind of it was a lot of pressure for me in that moment. I was also, again, finishing my thesis. So I was very stressed, and I think maybe a little rash and a little nervous. And looking back, I always, pretty much every situation professionally that I've had that I've felt nervous about, I look back and wish that I had just had a little bit more like, believe in yourself, like, come on, you're good, do it,
Yeah.
And so I think that's just something that comes with age and time and experience. But
yeah, it's tough, right? It's tough right off the bat. I know my initial job, your gut is I want to negotiate everything, but it was kind of a development program. So they've got tiers. If everyone isn't on the same level, then they've probably got tiers and 1 or 2 and that's it. I mean, you can't really negotiate much benefits. You don't even know what you're talking about or getting into. So
it's true. Yes.
Yeah. One difference though, I feel like engineers are in very high demand, even coming out of school. Would you say that architects are not?
I think they are now. I think there was a long period of time where there wasn't. I mean, 2008 destroyed the architecture industry.
Right.
And to the point that it's still reflected today. Like when you work in offices, there are a lot of senior people, like people who have been in the field for 35 years. And there's a lot of new people, like people who have been there for 10 years or less. But that sort of middle ground of like 15 to 20 years experience, like Gen X, they're not around. There's like a handful of them. And it's because a lot of people had to jump ship during 2008 because there just weren't jobs and people just completely changed fields altogether. But now, ironically, the pandemic has skyrocketed the architecture industry. The job market could not be better right now for architects. So I'm glad to hear that because I remember at the beginning of this when everything started, we didn't know what was going to happen. And I had friends losing jobs and stuff. I was really thinking about the kids about to graduate from school. And I was like, oh my God, there's going to be no work for them. But now the industry is booming and I'm sure that they're making a lot more money than I ever did when I was their age. And so it all worked out, I think, in the end for everybody. But, it kind of just depends, I think, on the market of if younger people are in higher demand and sort of what a firm is looking for. I think if you work for a more design-oriented office, younger people actually are probably in higher demand because they're better with softwares and things like that. But if you have an older technical office that's looking for people that have a lot of technical experience, that is knowledge that you can only learn by working. So it's tough, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah, I guess there's still a lot of new development going on after COVID, so that's spurring a lot of need for architecture.
Big time.
Very cool. Well, not cool that it was a screw up, but cool that you learned from it. That's what we're here to do.
You just got to take it for what it is. You can't go back and take it back. You just got to do better next time.
Push through. Cool. Well, tell me something you're excited about. It doesn't have to be work related.
Well, I am pretty psyched because the project I am working on right now, the project I got hired to do, been on it for almost 2 full years at this point. It's the only job I work on. We're about to issue our construction set next week, so that is pretty exciting. We sort of button up the drawings to a certain point, and that means for those of you who don't know what that means, like that's the sort of end all be all of the construction drawings, so basically the directions for the contractor. And the next step
the Lego instructions for the building.
Basically. And the next step is the owner of that building is going to bid the project out to contractors and subcontractors and everybody, and then early next year, we should start construction. So I'm definitely excited to see that building go up. It's actually in the neighborhood that I live in, so I will see it all the time going up. And like I said, I've never worked on a project quite so big, so it's not like I'm going to be able to miss it. I'm pretty excited to make that next step with this job and see it get done. Yeah.
Well, and you said that, right, one of the most exciting things was seeing a building that you actually designed in the flesh, which sounds super cool. And so I had Vlad on episode 2 who mentioned that since he works for BMW, they have these long product cycles because he basically sees a prototype all the way through development and through construction. So I guess you could say the same about a building, large-scale commercial building. Similar, right? If you're tied to this project, one, you don't want to leave it, but 2, it's very fulfilling to see it through, and I'd be excited too. I'll come visit and we can tour the building. That'll be fun.
Yeah.
You gotta make sure it's smart though.
No, we'll see about that.
Yeah. Next question. So you mentioned a couple mentors, maybe not one person in particular, maybe it is a couple, but what are they doing that you are currently not?
Most of my mentors are quite a bit higher up the food chain than me. So that's something to look at. What's interesting is that all of them, I would say, have different end goals themselves. So I can kind of pick and choose from them what I want to eventually be doing. I have a guy that I speak to often who was a supervisor of mine at one point. He is about to become like a big supervisor of a smaller office, and I think he's on a partner track now. I have another woman who I am friends with at this point who also used to be my supervisor. She's a bit younger too. She's about to have a baby, and so she's sort of showing everyone how you can kind of do that and still architect, and she's brilliant too. And then there's the woman who I used to work for at the landscape office, and she's a little bit older. She's actually probably going to be retiring at some point in the next 10 years, I would probably guess. I don't know for sure, but she's had an incredible career where she obviously has her own office and she's a manager of that, but she's also written parts of the building code. And like I said, she's a landscape architect, so she deals with a lot of the greenery and all that stuff in the city and all of that, like the law of those things. So there's a lot to take from.
Yeah. Are those like tracks that you see yourself doing and you want to like follow in someone's footsteps, or you just kind of take data points and you're like, all right, I like where I'm at and I'll get somewhere eventually?
Honestly, I'm not really sure just yet, because I think there is a future for me having my own office at some point in time. The only person I've worked for really that I think maybe is my old boss at my last office. He's an architect by trade, but he's a developer now. And so that office was a development office with an in-house architecture team, and I really enjoyed that work model. So I think as far as my professional future, I feel like maybe that's the direction it's going in. But I think that there's so much to be learned by the people I know already, even if that's not their end goal. I think that, let's put it this way, I think all of them could have that end goal. And get there. I just don't know that that's necessarily their own specific end goal. So I think there's plenty to take from them professionally to sort of see if one day, yes, I end up opening my own firm and sort of taking that leap, which is a very different path. Yeah.
Yeah, actually, I talked to one guy from my job that has a goal of, becoming a developer at some point. I think that there's a lot of people where when you're putting your hands on a lot of different projects and buildings, you want to do your own thing and start one from open to close. So yeah, it seems like a worthwhile goal. And I'm excited for you. So
Thanks so much, Eric.
Yeah, I'll support you on that journey. Speaking of supporting people, is there anything you want to promote? Would you support other future architects as a mentor? What are you looking to get out of this?
Well, anyone can find me on LinkedIn. It's just my name, Julie Verni, which is, going to be in the title. So feel free to connect, especially if you have any interest in working in New York, or you already are in New York, I guess. So that's probably where I'm going to be staying for the foreseeable future.
When this goes viral in 2.5 years, right?
Yeah, I'll still probably be in New York. So, but yeah, I'm always open to mentoring, or even if just people want to chat. And like I said, I've done plenty of talks with kids in high school. Sort of, they pick my brain or whatever. I'm obviously a younger person in the field, so I just went through school. I sort of have that experience that going and seeing the school and talking to teachers and stuff isn't exactly the same as talking to someone who just did it. But yeah, anyone can reach out anytime. I think my email's on my LinkedIn, so.
There we go. Well, I appreciate that. Yeah. It's funny with people reaching out to you from school. I used to get a couple phone calls from like NC State students, and they would call me up. I'd see the 919 area code. I'd be like, hey, they'd be like, hey, I'm, this student, I'm doing this, and like start talking to me. I'd get all excited. I was like, oh, I can't wait to tell them like what to do and what not to do. And then they're like, so we're fundraising for NC State, and we just wanted to give you an opportunity to give back. And I'm like, dang it, they completely played me. And then I won't share if I did or did not donate money. But anyway, nice that they're reaching out to you. Nice that we could have this conversation, Julie. It was fun. Thanks for your time. Enjoyed it. And I guess I won't see you over Christmas this year, but I'll see you at some point.
Yeah, we'll always get together at some point. We'll all get together.
Shout out the Verni Hype Squad.
Verni Hype Squad.